Well, we're coming back 6 o'clock to continue the conversation. I'm not going to make a practice of commenting on every step of the process because it is an ongoing process. And I'm not going to negotiate the transportation bill, which is really for the conference committee to be dealing with it. And I believe that that's the proper forum for the House leadership to present its latest proposal and for the Senate then to respond. I would just note from a factual correction standpoint that the House transportation proposal provides for $400 million in new revenue. And that's really the key. And I thought we had agreement on what constitutes new revenue. Trunk highway bonds are already part of the MnDOT's funding scheme. It is part of my proposal, but we don't count it as new revenue. New revenue is what we generate at the top is $600 million. That then goes into the highway overall fund, and without getting in the weeds. But that's where I thought we were all very clear. And that in this case, by that measure, they have proposed $300 million in general fund and $100 million in license fee increase. $400 million. So they're 2/3 of the way to where we need to reach. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to comment beyond that because, again, I'm not going to go negotiate this, and I'm not going to negotiate it in the press. But I think it's really crucial if we're going to have any chance of working out a transportation agreement that we all proceed under the same understanding of what the facts are. And that's what I want to correct here. We need a common agreement on what are the facts. When I talk about $600 million as the threshold each year for the next 10 years, that's new revenue above and beyond what we have now. And that's what's necessary. MnDOT has said, that's what the task force that I set up 3 years ago now has said is necessary to maintain our roads and highways and bridges in their existing condition, and then to make the improvements in these projects that people all over the state are waiting for and wanting. So I go back to the same message, which is get it done, and I can defer that to the conference committee from that point forward. Okay?
Governor, I was told that you folks are talking beyond just transportation. You're talking also about global targets. Is that accurate?
Yes, that would be accurate. And that was, we had this other meeting came, and so we decided that, we said that would continue at 6 o'clock. But yes, we talked about the supplemental budget. The House indicated they're coming forward tomorrow with a bonding bill. They indicated it was $800 million. We didn't talk about taxes, but we talked about we just beginning stage of talking about the global target.
Can you accept the bill without transit in it, and specifically the speaker says he's willing to let light rail, Southwest Light Rail, be killed?
Again, my own view is, and I've stressed before, that if they're going to kill Southwest Light Rail Line, which I guess they consider to be a political advantage in greater Minnesota, they need to be honest about what the alternative is. I asked the Metropolitan Council 6 months ago to say, what is the alternative? If there's no Southwest Light Rail Line, what is the alternative for that whole south from Eden Prairie to Minneapolis, for that whole, to relieve the highway congestion, which is already severe and is only going to get worse with the growth in that area, population growth and business growth. And you can look at their conclusion. There is no alternative. There's not even, you can't even draw on a map a rapid bus transit alternative route that would accomplish what the Southwest line would accomplish. So once again, it's one thing to say no to this and play it for political advantage, but if you're in the majority as they are, then they have a responsibility to co-govern. And this bill is unfortunately become more about next November's election than it has about the future of Minnesota. And that's what's at stake here. Nothing that we agree to or don't agree to is going to be in effect by next November when people are going to vote. So it can be portrayed however people choose to do so for their own political advantage. But the real test is, how is this going to benefit Minnesota? Are conditions going to continue to get worse with transportation, highways, roads, bridges, transit? Are we making Minnesota better by not providing the funds that are necessary to improve these systems, to grow these systems along with the population growth, along with the economic growth? That's what Minnesotans all over the state understand we need to do. We need to move Minnesota forward by improving our transportation system all over the state. And if that's not done in this session, then it's the people of Minnesota who are all of us who lose out in that proposition, so.
Governor, is it your impression that the speaker is willing, if you get too locked up on transportation again, to allow the other?
I'm not going to speak for the speaker. I'm not going to say.
You would like to see that happen, though?
What?
To have the other pieces move forward if transpo is not.
Well, I think they can set general targets. I mean, I don't, but I'm not commenting on, and we're in the middle of the process now. So again, I'm not going to make a, I'm not drawing lines.
Governor, is the fact that you're talking about global budget targets a sign that you're at least nearing agreement on how much of the general fund to put towards transportation so those other pieces can move forward?
Well, there's not necessarily agreement. I said in the meeting today that the 500, as I said yesterday, 500 million, which is the price, the cost of my proposal, both of my options to the general fund. I want to set that aside, put that into the next biennium for the purposes of transportation. If we don't get a bill this session, if we get the bill along the lines of what I propose, then that 500 million would go for transportation. I also said today, I believe another $200 million needs to be left on the bottom line at the end of the next biennium, because we're talking about a forecast now for the next 3 biennia. There's inherent uncertainty there, and I do not want to create a situation where if there's an economic downturn where we're not left with some protection. So I basically said we have $2.1 billion right now in projected surpluses for this biennium, 900 million, and 1.158 billion for the next biennium. So that's just short of 2.1 billion. And I said 500 million of that should be set aside for transportation now or next year. Another $200 million should be left on the line as a minimal amount of cushion against the economic forecast that will be forthcoming next November and next March. So that's $700 million that, from my standpoint, I didn't get agreement, and it's not, that's for them to assess, but 700 million of that 2.1 billion is off the table for the tax bill, the supplemental, for the whatever the bonding. That still leaves $1.4 billion for those purposes over the next 3 years, which should be not enough for everything that everybody wants to do in those areas, but it's certainly enough to have bills that that I can accept. So.
Clarify the role of the conference committee in the transportation deal. What is the idea to have the GOP unveil their offer there and have them do the work, or?
Well, the conference committee's got to do the work. I mean, I outlined proposal, but I didn't outline any of the details that make up even my proposal, much less the whole package. So I always, assume that this would go to my proposals would go to the conference committee. And then they are the ones who are going to have to fit it together. And I'm saying it's not one of my proposals, take it or leave it. It's, adding to the equation, and it's, I think, a responsible and true compromise in between the two respective House and Senate positions. But, if the House is moving its position and the Senate, then it's for them to respond. But they're the ones who are going to have to work out an agreement. It's their success or their failure.
So bottom line, are you making progress? And much more importantly, would you recommend that we stick around after the meeting tonight?
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Are you making progress?
Well, we're talking. I can't say we're making progress because, again, it's process. And I mean, progress and processes, you've all been around here long enough to know, are two very separate matters. And we're in process now, which again means that, what exists today at 4 o'clock will be different from what exists tonight at 7 o'clock. So, I mean, that's why I'm hesitant to comment on each one of these meetings after each one, is because it sets something in sort of in concrete, which is very, very fluid. Everything's fluid.
Governor, you just met with the equity group there. There's nothing for them in the House's proposal that I've been able to discern. What advice did you have for them?
Meet with the House leadership. Talk with the Speaker, talk with Representative Nabla, talk with Representative Garofalo, who's in charge of that area. But yes, I mean, my proposal still has 100 million. The Senate has most of that, and I think it's imperative that we have a solid equity package to show proper respect for the urgent situation that exists out there. Even 100 million, if you talk about statewide, is not sufficient, but it's a start. And not to do anything there, to me, is unthinkable.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.